72 hours before the historic presidential elections in Colombia, political parties and social organizations denounced that their witnesses are not being accredited and that several international observers have been expelled from the country. A strong 7.2 earthquake hits near the Peru-Bolivia border, no casualties reported so far. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins tour of 8 nations in the Pacific region to strengthen cooperative ties in multiple areas. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Colombia, 72 hours ahead of the historic presidential election, there are serious allegations against the National Registry. Different political parties and social organizations claim that their witnesses are not being accredited and that several observers and international guests have been expelled from the country. In spite of the fact that the National Registry, headed by Alexander Vega, said that the presidential campaign have not registered their witnesses, a few days before the first presidential round, the parties claim that it is the accrediting body, the one that's processing the request, astonishingly slow. The historic pact said that out of the 120,000 witness list, only 13,000 have been certified. Meanwhile, Team Colombia said that out of their 60,000 submitted applications, only 1,800 had been processed. And to make things worse, activist Victor de Correa Lugo said in his Twitter account that several international observers and guests have been expelled by Colombian immigration authorities. Authorities in northern Mexico said that 6 asylum seekers were killed and 25 were injured after a bus they were riding in fell through a safety fence and down an embankment. It was the latest in a series of deadly crashes and drownings of asylum seekers in the last week. The Civil Defense Office in the northern state of San Luis de Potosí said those injured in the bus crash included a 6-month-old baby and an 8-year-old child. The office also reported that people traveling on the bus came from Honduras, El Salvador, and Cuba. Prosecutors said the death included 4 women, 2 men, but their nationalities were not immediately clear. Local media reported the bus had departed from an area near Mexico City and was headed towards the United States borders. On Wednesday, the Legislative Assembly of El Salvador approved a new extension of the state of emergency imposed since the end of March to combat gang violence. This regime, which according to the Salvadoran Constitution can be applied in cases of war, invasion of territory, and other contingencies that affect public order, has been decreed by President Nayib Bukele. By means of the measure, the government is empowered to suspend for a period of time certain freedoms and guarantees, which, according to the executive, allows them to deploy security forces and the use of public resources to combat the criminality that has soared in the first month of 2022 to historic levels.
With
0 abstentions, 1 absent, 16 votes against, and 67 votes in favor, the extension of Legislative Decree number 333 of 27 March of this year containing the exemption regime is approved.
During the debate on the extension of the emergency regime, the sharp differences between the pro-government bloc and the opposition bloc on such a regime were exposed. Parliamentarians who support President Bukele repeated the attack on the moral commitment of those who oppose the emergency regime.
People who sell vegetables no longer want to pay rent to the gangs. Is that hard for you to understand? Picture yourself in the shoes of decent people that I know. It is very difficult for them to fill those spaces. But do it for the first time. I am sure that the Salvadoran people will support the actions of the President of the Republic and of this Legislative Assembly. And, President, let me tell you that we are with you to the last consequences in this war against gangs. We are already winning the race. The goal is already there. We are going to press the accelerator to reach that goal as soon as possible, which is the peace that we all long for.
Criticisms to the Executive Crime Control Plan were raised at the Parliament session. Claudia Ortiz, deputy for the Vamos group, insisted on accountability in the face of the failures of similar initiatives.
They will repeat and insist that those of us who oppose the regime of exception are defending delinquency, creating criminals, But a lie repeated 1,000 times is still a lie. I would like them to explain to the population why they cannot fight delinquency without the regime of exception. I would like you to explain to the people why the land control plan is not working. Because even a few years ago, people were happy with the great results of the land control plan. But something went wrong, and the rebound was worse. There have been 3 spikes in homicide so far in this administration. 3 years of the territorial control plan and more than $100 million allocated to it, to implement it. And now they tell us, they assure us that this is the ultimate solution, that today we are going to live in peace.
The organization now Consione denounced the alleged involvement of Western embassies in the climate of insecurity in Haiti and announced a sit-in outside the French embassy in Port-au-Prince. The group, also known as We Are Aware, stated that as the country suffers an escalation in violence, ambassadors from various countries as well as representatives from the United Nations and the Organization of American States have remained silent. The socio-political organization also criticized the government's inaction in the face of growing insecurity and the creation of armed groups that have already claimed hundreds of lives and forced tens of thousands to leave their homes without taking a place of refuge. Gangs have grown in strength in Haiti in recent years, increasing kidnappings and violence, with virtually no police resistance. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake shook a remote region of southern Peru on Thursday, sending frightened people running into the streets in nearby Bolivia, though there were not immediate reports of damage or injury. The U.S. Geological Service said the 7:02 a.m. quake was centered 13 kilometers west-northwest of San Gabriel, but it was fairly deep, 218 kilometers beneath the surface. The quake swayed some buildings in La Paz, the capital of neighboring Bolivia, where people fled into the streets. It was also felt in Peruvian cities such as Arequipa, Tacna, and Cusco, as well as in northern Chile, but local authorities and radio stations had no reports of damage or victims. U.S. elementary and middle school students will take to the streets again to reject gun violence after Tuesday's mass shooting at a primary school in Texas that killed 19 children and 2 teachers. As the names of the victims of the second deadliest shooting at a school in the history of the country are painted near Robb Elementary in Uvalde, numerous young people are demanding the right to study without having to run under fire. For that reason, they have gathered together with parents and representatives to call for the organization Students Demand Action, a strike in which all students, parents, and teachers will leave the school campus, classrooms, homes, and offices this Thursday. This action is the first after 3 years when millions took to the streets to reject the massacre that occurred at Parkland High School in Florida in February 2018. The inquiry targeting British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other senior officials for authorizing government parties that breached UK confinement rules for COVID-19 was published on Wednesday. Government officials Sue Gray's report on Downing Street parties during the confinement was published in full following the closure of a Scotland Yard police investigation that ended with 126 fines to 83 individuals. Revelations that Johnson and his staff repeatedly ignored restrictions they themselves imposed on the country in 2020 and 2021 fueled outrage in Great Britain and led to the opposition to call for the Premier to resign over the scandal known as partygate. On Wednesday, Boris Johnson took full responsibility but refused to resign.
Overwhelmingly feel it is my job to get on and deliver, and no matter how bitter and painful the conclusions of this may be, and they are, and no matter how humbling they are, I've got to keep moving forward, and the government's got to keep moving, and we are.
And during Wednesday's session in the House of Commons, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was the target of harsh criticism from both members of the Labour Party and members of his own party.
The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker.
I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support. But a question I humbly put to my colleagues is, are you willing, day in and day out, to defend this behaviour publicly? Can we continue to govern without distraction, given the erosion of the trust with the British people? And can we win the general election on this current trajectory?
Researchers from the Charles III Health Institute obtained the first draft of the complete sequence of the monkeypox virus. The massive sequencing work confirmed that the West African variety is the cause of the outbreak. The director of the Spanish Health Institute, Cristobal Belda, explained they were able to achieve the complete sequencing of the genome by joining 23 samples from patients, which allowed to confirm the virus origin and that it is the least harmful strain. Additionally, the Spanish Ministry of Health confirmed the sequencing covered 100% of the 190,000 base pairs of genome of this virus, which opened the possibility of more advanced studies to understand its behavior, circulation, and diffusion. This is one of the most complete sequencing obtained to date. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba accused the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of doing nothing in the face of Russia's military operation in his country. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Kuleba said NATO is completely sidelined as an alliance and as an institution. Kuleba said that at the beginning of Russia's military operation in Ukraine, there was a public sentiment that NATO was a strong force and the European Union was only capable of expressing various different levels of concern. The foreign minister praised Brussels for its groundbreaking decisions, which Ukraine did not expect them to make, and accepted that some NATO allies were helping his country. He also dismissed Moscow's claim that it was ready to provide a humanitarian corridor for ships carrying food to leave Ukraine in return for the lifting of some sanctions. Turkey has set out conditions for the Swedish and Finnish delegations to earn its support over the two Nordic countries' bids to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The country's presidential spokesperson Ibrahim Kalin emphasized Sweden and Finland's procedure to join the military alliance will not move forward if concrete steps are not taken to address Turkey's concerns. Officials from Sweden and Finland met with Turkish counterparts in the country's capital Ankara and in an attempt to resolve disputes with the Middle East nation, which opposes their NATO membership bids. According to Kalin, Turkey will continue consultations with both Nordic countries until the two nations respond to Turkey's security concerns. Turkey is the only NATO member that objected to Sweden and Finland's applications, accusing the two countries of supporting the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party and Syria's Kurdish People's Protection Units.
We conveyed our message in very clear terms that the process will not move forward unless Turkey's security concerns are addressed through concrete steps and with a certain timetable.
And we have more news coming up after the final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited the Solomon Islands, the first stop of his 8-nation tour in the South Pacific. Yi met with his Solomon Islands counterpart Jeremiah Manel and ratified that bilateral relations have developed comprehensively over the past 2 years between both nations. The Chinese Foreign Minister stated that his country will continue upholding South-South cooperation and supporting the Solomon Islands to achieve its development goals, as well as its efforts to defend its sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. His visit to the Solomons followed the signing last month of a security pact between the Asian giant and the island nation. The death toll from 4 bombs that ripped through minibuses and a mosque in Afghanistan has risen to at least 16, officials said on Thursday, with some of the attacks claimed by the Islamic State group. A top United Nations expert called on Taliban authorities to investigate the attacks, as well as a series of previous deadly blasts that targeted members of the minority Shiite and Sufi communities. While the number of bombings have dropped across the country since the Taliban took power in August, several fatal attacks rocked the country last month during Ramadan. According to health officials and the police, on Wednesday, at least 10 people were killed when 3 bombs placed on separate minibuses exploded in the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Later on that same day, another bomb exploded inside a mosque in the capital Kabul, killing 6 and wounding 18. Hours later, the explosions, the Islamic State group said on Telegram that its soldiers were responsible. And tensions have increased in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. The government has deployed military contingents in one of the city's districts amidst massive demonstrations led by former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Interior Minister Rana Sanaullah said that since the capital is home to the main central administration buildings like the presidency, the presidential residence, the parliament, and the Supreme Court of Justice, several army battalions have been deployed to the area. The Interior Minister said that former Prime Minister Imran Khan, ousted last April following a no-confidence motion, has been fueled by Washington's call on his supporters in this district known as the Shock to remain there until what he calls an imported government announces new elections. However, on Thursday, the sitting was temporarily halted by Khan himself. To avoid an uncontrollable civil conflict, the current administration has refused to hold a dialogue with the Pakistani Movement for Justice led by the former premier.
I want to send a message to this imported government. I am giving you 6 days. Announce the election within 6 days. Announce the election in June and dissolve the assembly. If you don't do it after 6 days, I will have to take my whole nation to Islamabad.
11 newborn babies died in a hospital place in the western Senegalese city of Tibaoune, President Macky Sall reported on Thursday. According to information released by the health minister Abdoulaye Diouf Sarr, the tragedy occurred at Mame Abdou Hassid's hospital in the transport hub of Tibaoune and was caused by a short circuit. Minister Sarr said the maternity unit was equipped to take care of 13 babies. The head of state expressed his deepest condolences to the families and mothers of the 11 newborn babies. In the meantime, World Health Organization Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus also sent his deepest condolences to the parents and families of the babies who lost their lives in this tragic event.
This situation is very deplorable. Imagine that a fire has killed so many babies because of the lack of organization and irresponsibility of the hospital authorities. We wanted to recover the bodies of the babies, but the director of the hospital told us that this was impossible because an investigation is underway and it is up to the prosecutor to make decisions. The whole population is devastated by what has just happened in this hospital.
Zimbabwe hosted an international summit on African elephant management and impact of the ban on ivory trade, which wildlife authorities in the country are urging to be lifted. Wildlife representatives argued that Zimbabwe and other countries with large herds are protecting vast stockpiles of ivory they can sell to raise funds for either conservation work or to support communities affected by growing elephant numbers. The country will this week press a drive to legalize the ivory trade, inviting officials from 15 nations to meet in a national park that's a beacon of success in protecting elephants. The African nations sought the support of the European Union to sell off around $600 million worth of ivory it has accumulated due to the global ban on the sale of tusks. International trade in ivory has been banned since 1989 under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora.
Presented. Unfortunately, when you go to sites, you go like COP19 and COP18, the last COP, they were not allowed in if you compare, you find the international organizations are actually allowed in, they participate, their views are taken on board. But see, what have they to do with the animals? who is supposed to be the key figure? The key figure are communities, and we have been pushing and pushing for that agenda, unfortunately without.
So, which means that these communities share their living space with wildlife, sometimes with dangerous wildlife such as lions, elephants, and that sometimes they contribute actively to the conservation of these animals. So if there are decisions to be made about the future of these elephants, about the trade, then it's just important that community voice is heard and communities actively participate in this process.
We have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.